Here follows an extract from my book Artful Designs, available from Amazon. Chapter 11, Part 3. Sensing that he had an audience, Forbes explained the scene before them. "There are no mysteries to unfold," he began. "The ligature marks around the throat suggest the obvious, and the bleeding from the nose and ears confirm this. If the windpipe is only partially closed, then such bleeding is likely to occur. I hardly need to go deeper to confirm my theory. The deep cut will be the fatal one, and will have probably even severed the trachea. That will have done the damage as much as strangulation. He wouldn't have suffered for long, a minute at most." Benedict blessed Forbes for his tact in referring to the disturbing procedures required for post-mortem examination as "go deeper." This term barely touched the reality of just how deep his examination could go. Acknowledging Benedict's gratified nod, Forbes continued. "There are a few ligature marks, but the deepest measures 1.2 millimetres and coincides with this wire that's so readily available nearby. You don't have to be a member of the Fine Art Trade Guild to know that this is industry standard," said Forbes. At this point, Drew managed to find his voice. "It's part of the gallery's old hanging system. It's a strong stainless steel that is wound and finished so as not to fray. It works in conjunction with the track and hanging system. We've stopped using this and now use invisible fixings. There are no fingerprints except the victim's. You can see the cuts on his fingertips where he grappled initially. The struggle would have been mercifully brief before his consciousness faded and his hands would have clenched in reflex," said Forbes. "It was too much to hope that the murderer's fingerprints would be left to save us the time and trouble ourselves," said Maddox. "There are plenty of cotton gloves to hand here, if you'll pardon the pun. I can take them for testing if you like, but it's doubtful that any of these were the particular pair that could have been used. They're all spotlessly clean. There may be DNA or sweat to help us, but we'll have to eliminate the staff here first, and that will take some time to process. It's highly unlikely that any of these gloves will show traces of the wire. Why would they leave them behind?" said Forbes. "We'll leave no stone unturned," said Benedict. "You'd better get on with it. In the meantime, we'll revert to some old-fashioned police techniques and time-honoured detective thinking. Can you get the gent tidied up a bit and moved when you're sure there's nothing else to see, Forbes? Drew, you'd better join the queue and give Forbes and his pals the key to your soul. It'll only take a couple of swabs. Maddox and I will see what our dear Brian can give us. Hopefully it won't be his awful tea." Sally had recovered her composure, and seeing the efficacy of good coffee the last time disaster had struck in the museum, she'd repeated the gesture. DCI James returned to the atrium to be greeted with a freshly ground coffee, which meant that, when he walked into the security lodge, he could legitimately wave away Brian's offer of a brew. "Let's get down to business," James began. "Brian, you and I need to figure out how this fiend keeps slipping between our fingers. Nobody can be this lucky, and somebody obviously thinks they've been mighty clever, but they'll have slipped up somewhere. You need to help me find out where." "I wish I could, sir. I really can't see how, but I won't stop trying," said Brian. "I'm taking this personally now. I can't have bad business like this happening under my nose." Scott had been visiting Finn at the hospital all morning, and as soon as he entered the gallery he could tell that something was very wrong. Drew's pale and worried face convinced him that all was not well, and he rushed over to his friend. "Whatever's wrong, Drew? You look like you've seen a ghost," said Scott. "I've seen a blighted and departed spirit, that's for sure," said Drew. "Drew, that's awful. I'm so sorry. He seemed like a lovely bloke," said Scott. The horror of what he'd just heard slowly sank in, and Scott dropped onto a nearby chair as his legs became wobbly with the shock. "I thought he was a lovely gentleman, but now I'm not so sure. Nobody is who I thought they were, or that's how I'm beginning to feel," said Drew. "Well, I'm just plain old Scott, you can be sure of that." Scott regained his composure and stood to grasp Drew's hand to affirm the statement. "That's reassuring," smiled Drew. "I gather that you've been to see Finn this morning. I thought he was still unconscious. Did he know you were there?" No, he's completely out of it, but the nurses say that it's good if somebody talks to him. It might help bring him back. That PC on guard isn't going to chat to him, is he? So that just leaves me. What about his family? Asked Drew. Scott laughed. You're joking. His mum won't trouble herself to move away from the TV and her ciggies, and she's the only family that he knows of. His dad might still exist somewhere, and he might even have a brother or sister. But if they do exist, nobody knows of them. Brad and Leighton haven't the gumption to sit with an unconscious body, and they won't go near the place because of the police guard, even if they felt inclined to see Finn. They're still sulking away, and he can rot for all they care. Poor kid. He really is short of friends when he most needs them. It's good of you to go, especially as it's his fault that you've got all this trouble. We may have followed different paths more recently, but in his own way, Finn was good to me when my dad died. I know he got me into all sorts of trouble, but he helped me in the only way he knew how. He included me into his circle and kept watch over me. The stupid idiot never did know when to stop, and he's really out of his depth now. But I won't forget the friend he was to me, not if I'm all he's got left. If he does recover, I hope he takes this second chance and puts it to good use. Maybe it'll be a new start and the opportunity to turn over a new leaf. We can only hope he gets the chance. Sergeant Maddox interrupted their conversation and asked if Scott would come with him and allow Forbes to take swabs so that his DNA could be eliminated from the enquiry. The dreadful reality that he was actually now also in a murder inquiry hit Scott with full force, and he was suddenly very afraid. You can't honestly think that I'd murder anyone. Oh, Lord, I'm the one with a criminal record. You're bound to think it was me. I wasn't even here. I've been at the hospital all morning. Scott would have continued to babble if Drew hadn't come to his rescue. It's all right. Our DNA will be all over the place here, and they just need to match our DNA so that they can ignore it, Drew said. We've all done it, Scott. It's a shock, I know, but you're in safe hands. Maddox and James will sort it all out in the end. Just remember that. Maddox put a caring but guiding arm around Scott's shoulders to take him over to the corner where Forbes had set up his temporary forensic surgery. Just give Forbes here what he needs, and then you can grab yourself a coffee, said Maddox. You'd better leave the drink until after, otherwise Cafe Arabica might become the prime suspect. Mind you, that stuff is criminal. Take my advice and have a decent cup of tea. For the full book of Artful Designs, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.